For me, like, sadness could be triggered by multiple things. What helped me was being comfortable and confident enough to say how I was feeling.
As a carer, I felt overwhelmed and feelings of frustration. There is collective hope amidst struggle.
I used to get angry. I got so angry that I lost people that I cared about.
I think most families have generational trauma. I am Kaiser Jamal. I'm a spoken word poet, writer, model, and trans visibility activist. Generational trauma is something that comes from those before you. Definitely both of my parents have felt the conditioning of society and felt the full effects of oppression, I think. So I guess the systematic racial inequality that exists within my parents that in turn kind of like exists in me. There's so much trauma that I have which is maybe based on abandonment, which is derived from my parents. It's kind of crazy how much it impacts you as a person and it shapes you as a person. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that like unknowingly I've carried for a long time. My mum was definitely more open talking about mental health, whereas my dad is a lot more closed off and probably actually suffers with his mental health more. There's definitely a racial separation, assimilation of whiteness for like parents who immigrated to the UK, I think probably took a lot of time and energy. You know, sometimes you have to opt out of something. I think a lot of our parents opted out of their mental well-being. I do watch friends and family almost become invisible in the conversation of mental health, specifically cis, het, black men. And I think that's something that is very much ingrained. I have so many friends that I'm like, you need to be in therapy. And they're like, why would I go to therapy? Like, that's not, like, I remember someone said to me, like, that's not a black thing. And I was like, wow, this is a huge root of our community mental health issue. There is no access to things. So if there is no access or invitation to something, you believe it's not for you. And I think our parents' generation had that even more than we do. There's such a privilege in being like, I don't want to struggle. I choose not to. Sometimes we get caught up and we forget that we're very much in like an echo chamber of validating one another. When you look at the generation above us, there's a lot of our parents who have kind of walked around this world with no one holding their hand and no one saying like, I've got you. There's only so much that someone can do with what they've been provided. And I think our generation do have a responsibility of trying to use our voices and our resources. Our generation is very, very good at like taking. And sometimes we forget that we should be giving back. And whether it is giving a book, whether it's like a mindfulness CD, whether it's an app, trying to help facilitate and plant these things in people's lives so that we can normalize it. We should also be giving back to those who kind of paved ways for us to be here. Something that I've really been able to like show my parents that I'm okay with being sad. I'm not fighting it. I'll call my parents having a full-on breakdown. And sometimes, I don't know, maybe it makes them feel uncomfortable because like it's a mirror that they're not ready to see. Like it's a mirror to show them how comfortable I am in being sad. Addressing my own trauma has been a long and winding road. Say trauma is like an inflatable ball and you're in the middle of the sea. I'm a poet, so I have to have weird analogies. And I put my hand down and I put this trauma under the water. It just is gonna pop up somewhere else. Like it's gonna disappear for like 4 seconds and then it's gonna come up somewhere else. And like learning how to be like, no, it's like about taking this ball out of the sea and not just hiding things. Health is wealth and like it all starts here. Like everything in your world, it is literally the thing above anything that you have to look after.
My name is Elen Salam-Klai and I am a mental health advocate, writer, and I'm currently training to be a psychotherapist. I grew up in South London, in Kennington. Me and my twin brother, we were born in Paris. My mum is Eritrean and my dad's German. My twin brother would say he's probably more German and I'm more Eritrean. This is quite strange. But yeah, me and him are very close, yeah. Look at this. He's always had autism, like since we were kids. And so kind of became like a sort of carer slash older sister, sometimes quite maternal, like very protective over him. I think definitely growing up it was hard. There wasn't much awareness on disabilities. He was quite angry as a kid, and usually I would be the one to get a call and be like, calm him down. My mum fought quite hard with the council to try and ensure that he had support in school and that he could also go to quote unquote normal schools, because she felt like there shouldn't be any reason why he's excluded from mainstream education. When we were 18, my brother started developing psychosis. I'd gone to uni, and I remember I was in freshers and he was already telling me then he's starting to get hallucinations. At the beginning, we didn't really understand how serious it was. Both my parents are quite analytical and very academic. It's quite hard for them to grasp. They knew about disabilities and special needs, but not mental illnesses. So they really had to learn. Our minds are kind of beyond our human control. My brother was sectioned like 9 years ago. Yeah, it was a while back. And then since then, it's been in and out, in and out, in and out. He's got immensely better, but the conditions still aren't there for him to be able to live within the community. There is support for families who have a loved one in mental health institutions, but I think when you're dealing with all of the logistics of the situations, you don't really have any time to even do the research to look for support for yourself. I think that was actually the main reason I wanted him and his to come out, because there's so many people going through things that are just exacerbated by maintaining this facade. Him and His is a creative anthology. It was meant to be just like a little pocketbook and then spiraled into a book of 120 contributors. And it features poetry, we've got essays, photography series, all sorts of work, but from people of like completely different backgrounds who've either been directly affected by the stigmas of men reaching mental health support or men who are actually currently in mental health institutions at the moment. What I was trying to do with Him and His is to create kind of a community that wasn't completely attached to the trauma of the situation and more about enjoyment. So looking at our mental health before a point of crisis. When you're a carer, there's a lot of responsibility and you kind of forget yourself in that process. There's a really fine line of neglecting your own self-care. Don't discount how much what they're going through is going to affect you. I would say seek support for yourself as well, making sure that you have time for yourself still and you don't feel guilty for that as well. And I had to learn too. I've only got to grips in the past 2 years, probably since COVID. You can learn, but it still takes a lot to practice what you're preaching. Yeah, I can't share my cup if it's empty, if you get what I mean.
My name is Benjamin May. I am the co-founder of The New Normal, which is a charity that advocates or creates space for peer-to-peer support for adults who are suffering from grief from bereavement and also from mental health. I'm a barber by trade, so I have always used my chair as the space for me to talk. You know, people talk about how going to your barber is therapy, and if you're one of my customers, it really isn't. Like, you're coming to me to be my therapist. I spent a lot of time on football terraces when I was young, around a lot of very violent people. These men had been really deprived of work, of opportunity, and that fed into their children. My dad himself was known to be quite a violent man when he was younger. There seemed to be a trend of aggression and violence. The first time that I was sent to a therapist, I was 10. I'd been kicked out of school. Mental health wasn't something that I was aware of. My parents were in the process of going through a divorce. I was really struggling. I went to one session, said absolutely nothing, didn't go again for another 16 years. It took me until I was 26 to really start to think about who I was as a person and what my behaviour meant. I was in a relationship with this really wonderful person. She gave me everything that I needed, but when the relationship started to fall apart, I wasn't actually able to articulate myself. When we broke up, my partner said she loved me, but she didn't like who I'd become. That really struck a chord with me, and it sent me into this journey to have to work out exactly who I was and why I was behaving like this. For the first time in my life, I was really starting to see the shades and the shadow of the men that I'd grown up on those football terraces around. It was at this moment where I decided that I was going to try and get help for anger. I had no idea what that looked like. I had no idea how to go about doing that, but I managed to find a space that were willing to at least speak to me and find out whether or not they could help me and how that might look. So I went in, I spoke to them, and basically the guy sat there with his clipboard and he said, Ben, look, normally everyone comes here on court order. Here I was in this space speaking to this guy who was allowing me to come in and join what they were doing, which was working with incredibly violent men who had been sent there by the courts as a way to rehabilitate. And I wanted to be a part of that because that potentially is who I could have ended up being. And I set about on around about 18 months worth of anger management therapy. The first 4 or 5 weeks I got to sit with a guy one-on-one and would talk. And I was like, when are they going to teach me about anger management? When am I going to learn that I need to leave a room when I'm angry, or count to 10, do something, right? And that never happened. He just kept talking to me. And what I realized was that what I needed to do was have a space where I could talk about all of the things that were happening in my life, no matter how trivial I thought they were. I started to understand about the working class background that I had come from. I started to realize a lot of the apathy and the anger and the frustration. This was the first time that I had ever had the space to kind of explore who I was and what was going on. That's given me the ability to actually give space to the people around me, to be able to speak, to be able to explore how they're feeling. I've recently created a course with a friend of mine. It's called Grief 101. The whole point of this course is about teaching communities empathy. It's about teaching people how to support their friends, their colleagues, their peers when they're going through grief, when they're going through bereavement. So I have this theory, the Russian doll theory. When we're born, all of the trauma that has existed before us in our parents, our grandparents, our communities are put immediately into who we are. At our core, we are neutral good. Every single piece of trauma that exists adds another Russian doll to us. It's when we start to talk about that trauma that we start to remove those dolls and we start to move back towards that neutral good state. The more dolls you remove, the more generational trauma you get rid of, the more you break the cycle. I understand why people don't want to open up. I understand how scary it is to take that first step to speak to someone. To even acknowledge the things that are going on in your life is so daunting. Find your space, find a space where you can open up. That could be one person or it could be a group of people. But if you can find a space to start to talk about how you're feeling, then you can learn to speak about that in other spaces as well.
I just want people to recognize that we all deserve a chance at forever and freedom and love. And sometimes our brain just doesn't let us know that. If your brain isn't letting you know that, then this is the reminder. You deserve it all. We all do.
If you had a physical ailment, you wouldn't suffer in silence. There will always be one person who is also going through a similar thing. You're not alone in whatever struggle that you're facing.
Talking and opening up about how we feel is so key. Don't be scared of it, because the moment that you start letting some of that darkness out, you let in light.